you need to present the members of parliament with the evidence for and against, who are the stakeholders who are for and against. And the members of parliament in New Zealand were only getting one view, which was basically the proponents of the policy.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged Podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Vaping Unplugged, World Vapers Alliance podcast, where we talk about vaping, tobacco harm reduction, and everything related to it, science, politics, etc. Our guest today is Marewa Glover. She is a New Zealander public health and smoking cessation expert, and we're going to talk about some of her latest research, so tune in for a very interesting podcast. Welcome, Marewa, and thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's nighttime here.
Yes, very large time difference. So thank you for the effort for joining us. Let's talk about your research. You recently published a scientific paper in which you are studying the perceptions of adult smokers towards new policies, tobacco endgame policies. Can you tell us, for the people that have not heard about them, a little bit more on what are these policies about? What do tobacco endgame policies consist of?
Tobacco endgame policies. So in New Zealand, what was proposed is that the amount of nicotine in cigarettes, all cigarettes, so across the board, would be reduced to 0.8 milligrams per gram. So this is very, very low. It's below the level that people who have taken part in trials in a lab setting, they can't detect the nicotine at that level. There will be no hit, so very low. And so I call it denicotinization. The second policy that was proposed was what's being talked about in the UK at the moment, the age ban. And so New Zealand was the first, well, not the first country to pass it, but the age ban in New Zealand, people have to be 18 or over to buy cigarettes and vaping products. And in 2027, that was going to go up by 1 year every year, so on and so on. So eventually, even adults who are age 30, 40, 50 would no longer be able to buy cigarettes. The third policy was to reduce the number of retailers that could sell cigarettes. And we also have loose pouches of loose tobacco in New Zealand. We had about 6,000 to 8,000 retailers around the country, and that was going to be reduced to 599. A lot of people think New Zealand is a small country, but actually if you look at the actual land, the size of New Zealand, we're almost the same size as Japan, that has 121 million people. We have about 5.2 million people, many of them, of course, being children, and, spread across the country. So that was going to be, for some people maybe living in a rural area, quite a way to go to find one of these tobacconists or these retailers that were still allowed to sell tobacco. So these three policies were passed into law in 2022. However, I do want to say, because my new paper was written previously, before I started this study, before the law was passed, just when it was being proposed. And since writing the paper, we have a new government, and they have repealed these three laws, so they will never take effect now, or they're not going to take effect now. Does that make sense, those policies?
Well, I mean, we're going to see that now if they make sense for what they aim for, right? For helping people quit smoking. And but I wanted to ask you before we dive into your latest paper and the findings and how you did it. I wanted to ask you, why do you think these policies are becoming so popular? Because we have seen New Zealand, we have seen the UK, we have also seen Malaysia recently. They were going to pass this legislation, but then they repealed it. Why do you think governments are using these very coercive policies to achieve their objectives?
Well, they have been proposed for, I guess in tobacco control, there's been discussion of these policies for well over a decade. But when it comes to policy, it is what will the public accept? What will the public agree with? I think that the pandemic and the lockdown policies really shifted things. It showed that governments could take quite extreme action to protect health and prevent people from, in that case, catching the COVID virus. And I think that really changed the environment, and it meant for public health that, well, stopping people smoking is of equal importance. 6 million, what is it? It's about 7.2 million people a year die from smoking-related illnesses, whereas with the COVID pandemic, it was less than half of that per annum. And yeah, I think that it really shifted the thinking in terms of, well, if you can do that to stop people catching COVID, and you can lock people down in their homes and shut businesses, etc., what happened, then, we should be able to pretty much ban the purchase of cigarettes. And these policies, the denicotinization was going to, in New Zealand, nobody would have been able to buy legally tobacco, cigarettes, or the loose tobacco that had nicotine in it, that would be enough to give you the hit that would maintain the dependency on nicotine. So that was kind of like almost putting the whole country into cold turkey from the date that people would have stocked up, of course, but once they ran out, that would pretty much be it. And they wouldn't be able to maintain that nicotine dependency. The age ban is prohibition, really, that eventually nobody would be able to buy tobacco, cigarettes. And the retail reduction in retail stores was really about making it very, very difficult, a lot more costly for people to access cigarettes. And we've seen that the very, very high tax on tobacco has been a motivator for people to try and stop. The problem has obviously been that trying to stop was hard for a lot of people, and some people couldn't do it until vaping came along. And then we've seen a rapid drop in smoking prevalence in New Zealand. We're down to 6.8% now smoke cigarettes daily.
Do you think there is also a political problem, so to say, that smokers, in general, vapers, or this type of consumers or of these products are not as good organized as they should be politically to fight these bad policies, these prohibitionist policies, and so that they don't have the strength to repeal them or fight them back?
Oh, yeah, people who smoke have not had any political voice for as long as I can remember, and I've been working to reduce smoking for 31 years. So very, even 3 decades ago, people who smoked were seen as very biased because of their nicotine dependency, their dependency on smoking. They were ridiculed, portrayed in a very negative way, which caused, stigmatization, marginalization. I mean, the campaigns we ran were designed to make people hate smoking, but they also made people hate people who smoke. So that's been quite negative for people who smoke, and we have a lot of people who are like closet smokers. They don't tell people they smoke, or they hide that they smoke. They don't tell their doctors they smoke. I mean, some people do, but there are a lot of people who are quiet smokers. They don't smoke around anybody else. So no, people who smoke have not had any respect as consumers who had a right to say anything about policies designed to stop smoking. And anyone who said anything against any tobacco control policies would be portrayed as in a very negative light, and in the media, and even when they report to select committee hearings, they might go to a government select committee hearing, which is to hear from the public. What do you think of these policies? And with this particular policy, I did see some of the select committee, because it was online. There were small family shop owners who sold cigarettes, and they went along to have a say. This is going to make us bankrupt. Please don't do this. And then, the way that some of the members of parliament that were on the committee treated them was just atrocious, just really nasty, and making fun of them. And I think, in terms of people who vape, there definitely are vaping advocacy groups and groups representing consumers of vaping products. And some of those groups also sort of stand up for adults' right to choice, that, this is a harm reduction approach. With harm reduction, you should start where the person is, provide them with information, provide them with choices. And vaping is a pretty good substitute for smoking, which is, pretty much why New Zealand's smoking rate is rapidly reduced. And we see that around the world, and, Japan, Iceland, Sweden, even in the US, UK, Ireland, so countries around the world are seeing a rapid reduction in smoking, where these risk-reduced products that are effective as substitutes, people are moving en masse to those products. But people who smoke have no voice.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's very sad to see how not only smokers, but also vapers in many countries are being stigmatized. For example, I remember in Mexico, the president compared them with fentanyl users, which is completely mad and a whole nonsense. So very sad to see how some people are feeling stigmatized, and they are treated as if they were drug dependent people or drug addicts. But let's dive a little bit more into your research into this last paper that you published. So you basically studied the perceptions of New Zealand smokers toward these 3 policies, this pack of 3 policies that you talked about. How did you do this? What was your approach? And what were your main findings? What did they think of these policies?
So what I wanted to find out, because having worked as a policy analyst, you need to present the members of parliament with the evidence for and against, who are the stakeholders who are for and against. And the members of parliament in New Zealand were only getting one view, which was basically the proponents of the policy, the academics that wanted to do this, were presenting them with only their view. And they also did some surveys, like polling people, and were saying that 78% of people who smoke even support these policies. I thought, well, how can they even know that? How can they form and have an informed position on these policies when they haven't been tried anywhere in the world? They've never been tested in a real life environment, and they're very novel. I thought it would be like asking somebody, surveying people, agree, disagree, or strongly agree to strongly disagree. How do you think you would like to live on Mars? How do you think, yeah. And how would people know? We don't know what it's like to live on Mars. And I thought that's the same with these policies. The evidence that had been done on these policies, particularly the denicotinization policy, was really, they were studies done in a controlled lab setting, or people were given free denicotinized cigarettes and asked to try them. But everywhere that participants in those studies participated in them, they always had access to their own usual strength cigarettes. So I really wanted to look at people who smoked, what they thought of these policies, and how did they process the policy. So I used a cognitive model, the associative propositional evaluation model, which is explained in the paper. And it really looks at the thinking people go through when they're presented with a novel stimulus, something they've never come across before. And that model proposes that the first response is often an emotional one, and then people will look to see what do I know about this, and so they're kind of like, I use a filing cabinet, and they go to the first drawer. What do I know about this? I don't know anything about this. So they go to the second drawer. What experience do they have of anything like that? Or what does other people they know, what do they have? They experienced anything like this? And again, especially with the denicotinized policy idea, that was the most novel. That's what one of our findings. There was the most novel idea that people were presented with. And they were trying to liken it to, some of them said zero, or it would be like zero alcohol beer maybe, or smoking lawn clippings, or it might be like the cigarettes that they use in the movies, the fake ones. So they go through that process of looking for their own knowledge, their own experience of it. But some of them had other values that they drew upon, such as policy should be just and fair, and they didn't feel that this was. Adults should have the right to make their own decisions about what they do with their body. They can go to war. They can, at a certain age, they can go to war. They can drive a car. They can drink alcohol. They should be able to make decisions about this as well. So they didn't like that the denicotinize and the age ban policies were taking away adults' autonomy to make their own choices. Some felt that it was a threat to democracy and liberty. So those people who had those, went to that kind of a value base, they didn't like the policies. And so the last step is to form an opinion. And actually, many of the participants said, I can't form an opinion on that because I don't know. You need to do studies. You need to provide people with a usual strength cigarette versus a denicotinized cigarette, see what will happen to them. And many of them were concerned about the unintended negative consequences that, for one of the policies we did ask about, because we had the novel ones and some that we thought people would be familiar with. we asked them about what if the government took the filters out of cigarettes, like banned filters, because it was proposed here that they would do this. And on that one, actually, some people were like, well, why would you do that? Don't filters make it safer? They don't, but, they thought they did. And that will just make it messy and horrible for people. So there was a range of feelings, certainly in terms of forming an opinion. A lot of people were like, I wouldn't know, I can't say. So if they had been presented with a survey, and surveys often use like a forced choice. So do you agree with this strongly, or you strongly disagree, etc.? You have a choice of 5 answers, or do you support this, or yes or no? That type of research method would not have picked up the wide range of opinions, concerns that our participants raised about unintended consequences, what people might do to get around the policy, like with the banning filters, they thought people would make their own, and, like out of tampons or plastic or cardboard. And with the denicotinization one, they thought that people would try to put the nicotine back in. Obviously, a lot of people thought that the black market would grow, black market and crime, especially with the reduced numbers of stores. In New Zealand, we've had a lot of robberies of tobacco stores, even, before this policy was being seriously considered. So the black market and crime associated with that was definitely something people knew about. They'd seen that on the news, and they thought that would get worse.
You've been studying these policies for some time now. What would you think? Just to be clear, these policies didn't get implemented in the end, because I think they were supposed to be implemented this year, right? But they were repealed 2023 by the new government, as you mentioned. But had they been implemented, what do you think would have happened? Would we have seen a rise in illicit trade, you think?
Yes, I think we would have seen a rise in illicit trade and in the black market. I think that the small number of stores that would be left would have to, well, they would have been a target, definitely for robberies. And many of the robberies are violent. We've had one shopkeeper killed even before these policies, if they'd passed. And we've had, people driving cars into the front of shops. So in the law that did get passed, it said that if a retailer, they had to all apply, and they had to say that they would provide security, that they would have all these different security measures, and that they would have to pay for themselves. But, still, when you've only got 599 stores across the country, and the location of them would be up on the website, we did expect that black market would increase. I think there was a man today in New Zealand who was before the courts for illegally importing, millions of dollars worth of tobacco cigarettes. So it's definitely happening here, even though we're an island in the South Pacific, and our nearest neighbour by plane is 3 hours away. That would be Australia. So, but I was particularly concerned about the effect on people with mental health conditions, people low income. This would have disproportionately, the negative impacts would have impacted on them disproportionately more, because more of them smoke. People in rural areas would have been disproportionately affected by the distance they would have to go to buy cigarettes. And so as I said, the new government repealed them. The first one of these policies that was going to take effect was going to be this year, and that was the reduction in the number of retailers. Next year, on April 2025, and we have this 5% below smoking prevalence goal by 2025. So April 2025 was going to be the introduction of the denicotinized cigarettes, and they would be the only ones available on the market. And then the age ban wouldn't have kicked in and started until 2027. So in 2027, it would have gone up to R19 and 1 year increase every year after that.
One more question about the denicotinization. Was it aimed to make a smoker shift to other alternatives? Because I assume a lot of people smoking traditional cigarettes will be tempted to shift towards vaping or other methods to consume nicotine in a safer manner. Or was this also thought in the line of protecting the youth and making sure that no youngsters will get addicted to these products also?
The whole piece of legislation, the aim of it was to prevent young people from ever starting to smoke. So that was the purpose of the law. However, it would have had the effect, especially the denicotinization one, of basically taking away cigarettes that are functional, that provide the benefits people smoke for, completely away. And they would have had to shift to vaping if they still felt the need, for nicotine. Luckily, New Zealand is very supportive of people adults switching from smoking to vaping. The Ministry of Health, we have another piece of legislation that when they regulated vaping, and they've run campaigns encouraging people to stop smoking, by switching to vaping. And many cessation services support people to have that as an option. The other options we have are the nicotine replacement patches and gum and lozenge, which people can get free from the pharmacies. And we also have an oral nicotine spray, which people can buy from the supermarket, though that's not subsidised. But the new government has said that they will subsidise all of the nicotine replacement medications, including the oral nicotine spray. The other product that we had that, I don't know that many people use it, but the heated tobacco product was legal under the vaping regulation, but advertising is not legal. So not many people know about that. Most people have switched to vaping. The new government has said that they will also repeal a previous ban that was introduced by the previous government on oral nicotine pouches. And I presume that will also include Swedish snus. So those products, assuming the government goes ahead with that promise, we will have a wider range of substitutes for smoking that people can switch to. Now, just going back to, preventing young people from starting to ever smoke, the goal in New Zealand was 5% or below smoking prevalence by 2025. At the end of 2023, we're already at 6.8%. So we're almost there without these radical policies that remove adult rights that they're used to having. So I think that that's a very important part of policies when it starts to shift from sort of that democratic respect for adult autonomy. If you want people to change their health behavior, you provide information, you provide support to make that change. You don't just introduce a totalitarian-like policy that says, like prohibition. And of course, there's a lot of evidence that prohibition has not worked in the past. It didn't work for alcohol. It's not working in Australia for prohibition of vaping products. And I think that a lot more, what I argue in the paper is that a fair and just and robust policy analysis process, consultation with the public, was not performed, and that is not that doesn't align with a democratic process.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. I think that always stakeholders, especially when they are so directly affected by the regulations, they should be in some way taken into account in all the policy making processes. But still, I think that, well, I'm very happy that these laws got repealed and that New Zealand's new government is so supportive of safer nicotine alternatives. So I think if it continues this way, it's going to be another big example for other countries to follow. And especially if you reach the below 5% daily smokers rate, which is also the goal in the European Union, but we are still very far from it, except for Sweden. So definitely a great example for us. And thank you so much, Marewa, for joining us. Also, I forgot to mention, Marewa is the founder of the CORES, which is the Center of Research Excellence on Indigenous Sovereignty and Smoking. And we're going to leave all the links here in the description so that you can follow Marewa's work. Thank you so much for joining us, Marewa.
Thank you. Thank you for interviewing me about this, and I hope people have a read of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, and thank you to all the viewers. See you in the next episode of Vaping Unplugged. Bye-bye.
Bye.